Good morning, everyone. My name is Jimmy. I want to talk a little bit about my open source journey and really where I started out, where I'm coming from, and the things I've learned to make open source easy for myself. Really to get to the point where I could do as little work as possible, but then not really annoy people too much about me not doing much work at all. So a little bit about the projects that I work on. The biggest project people know me for is AutoMapper. But I have other ones that I've also had some success with. I think my most successful project to date is actually this one right here. I've somehow convinced 588 people to download this specific package, which really just does one little thing here. You install the package, and then it pops up a browser for NanCat, and that's all it does. Now, this was really just an experiment to see if I could make NuGet package launch any random process whatsoever, and it turns out that yes, you can just launch any process whatsoever. So all sorts of lead things going on there. So thinking about how to make a successful project, first I have to figure out what does success actually mean for me in terms of how do I feel success in an open source project. I would say low expectations, but I don't try to change the world with the tools I build. I really just try to do things that just help myself. And if I could build something that helps myself, then I'm happy. If I get to build something that I can take on to the next project, the next project, the next project, then I can also make my clients happy as well. And that's really what I try to do with most of my projects. Sometimes I have projects that also help other people at my company, so other teams that I'm working with. And it's really cool if they can help. If I help them, that's great. And if it helps the community, that's just really kind of icing on the cake, but that's something I strive for, I really set out for. I'm really just trying to do something for myself, and if it helps other people, that's cool. If it doesn't, I don't care, I'm still using it. So when I first started out doing open source in .NET, I actually, my very first open source project was a really bad idea called Behave Sharp. Behave Sharp was, this is back in the day when people thought it was a really good idea to have like executable specifications like as a, I want to, so that, the story sort of stuff in your code. I was at a job at the time where basically I did no work whatsoever. I think in the 9-10 months I was there, I committed like 6 lines of production. So I was just bored out of my mind. I had rewritten the build like 6 times. I'd automated as much as I could automate. And so I blogged ridiculously amount. And then I got bored. I saw someone else have this project called InBehave or something. And I decided that I could do it better. And so I decided in my spare time, well, actually at work, because all I had was spare time, I created this different project that was basically a complete ripoff of this other existing project saying I could do it better. But this project, I never actually ever used it in any real environment. I didn't actually try to get my company to use it. It was just born out of sheer boredom. The project actually wound up getting combined and released into something else, but I never actually used it ever again. So it was really just a kind of a horrible experiment that really didn't make any sense. So the first thing I really learned was that projects born from actual necessity are far more useful than those just born out of sheer boredom. So if you're bored and building something and trying to convince people to use it, you're probably not going to have a good time doing it. But if you have something that's actually solving some need that you have, then that will actually have a much more greater chance of having that success that you're looking for. The second lesson I got was try to collaborate before just copying stuff. Forking or otherwise just being a jerk. I just made this project and said, hey, look at mine, how much better it is than the other one. And the other guy was like, hey, that's great. Why didn't you come to me and we could work together on this? And I was like, then that's not glory for myself, so this is what I'm going to do. Of course, I still get mad when people do that to my projects, but that's a different thing. And the final lesson I really got here was that projects that are actually extracted from production use are far more useful from ones extracted from experiments. So all the other open source projects that I put out there have been in production for a very long period of time before I even tried to put them out there and say, hey, this is a thing. A lot of times it'll be extracted out maybe to an internal library, and then after we use it in a couple more projects, then I might put it out as an open source project, but otherwise it really needs to be used in a real production environment for me to actually find some use out of it. Now, I can be a slow learner sometimes, so I had another experiment with Entity Framework where I decided I would have this idea of global filters, in which you could have like some global filter defined, and you define it in one place and say, I only want to show the active listings for something. And you can define this in one place and have that filter applied to every single query across all of Entity Framework. It was a really cool idea, except I never actually used it before. And so I started getting all these bug reports about how it wasn't actually working properly. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I've never used it before. And they're like, maybe you shouldn't blog about this and tell people to use it when you've never actually used it yourself. So yeah, even though I tell myself I shouldn't do this was just like last year, and so all the people call me out saying, hey, can you go ahead and like not talk about this anymore, like point people to the one that actually works? And so Eric's a good buddy of mine, so I was okay with him calling me out like that. So looking at the biggest success I have is in my main project I work on, which is AutoMapper. AutoMapper actually started development somewhere in 2008, and back then that's like, that was like, if you remember back then, that was like Dark Knight, Iron Man, and Twilight actually was back then too. So really back in the day. Now there's like 3 or 4 Iron Men's movie, or Iron Men's. So it's quite a long time ago that this has been around. And it was originally inspired, this project, from a post from Jeremy Miller, who was talking about how he built MVC projects. And he had this big opinionated post about how he liked to build MVC projects. And Phil Hack's here, right? Yeah, so he had this lovely thing here. He says, the current MVC framework isn't very good at all. I just thought that was pretty funny. But you guys are real good buddies now, so that's... So this project was part of a really large system that we were about to build. This system I was working on was for juvenile case management, which everything has to be a 3-letter acronym, so it's a JCM-S. Actually, there's a S system in there. And if you were a kid and you got in trouble, you got arrested, then you would go through our system to try to make sure you didn't get into more trouble. And the whole purpose of this system was really to make sure that kids were looked after, and if they got into trouble, then we tried to make sure they didn't go to jail and have worse things going on in their lives. So it's kind of a cool project to be a part of, but one of the interesting things about it is that it was trying to serve basically everyone that might touch any part of the legal system across the entire state of Texas. So there was several different agencies involved. There's like law enforcement agencies, probation departments, just a whole bunch of people involved in this. And it was a very, very large MVC project. At the current count, which is still in development today and being pushed out of production, it has 352 controllers and over 1,000 actions, which is really, really ridiculous that you have a system that big. And so we had this idea that I liked Jeremy's ideas of how to build MVC projects. I knew that's what how I wanted to build it. But then I saw the scope that was coming down the pipe of like how big this was. And I knew I needed to solve this problem pretty quickly about how to deal with this problem of mapping some object to another object. So the first side note is don't ever create projects this big. Like that's really, really, really ridiculous. If you have over 1,000 actions in a project, that's just insane. Don't do that. So AutoMapper started out, it was a couple weeks in mid-2008 inside this current project where I started just playing around with different ideas, trying to come up with something that would help with this issue of mapping this one object to another. There was about 6 months of internal refinement inside that project before I actually pushed out the first production release in January 2009. That was the first public commit, but the internal commits were well before that. Now this is kind of cool because there's a lot of companies I know that out there that they don't let their employees work on open source projects, and that kind of sucks. When I was developing this, we actually had a meeting internally like, well, we have this cool idea. What should we do with it? Should we make a library out of it and try to sell it? I didn't really like that idea because that's not like, again, work to do to try to sell this thing. And just the idea didn't make sense to me because we ourselves built on top of a lot of other open source projects, and it just seemed like the natural thing to do to go ahead and pay that back and say, I want to then contribute this out to the community as well. So we decided internally that, okay, we're going to go ahead and make this an open source project. And I think we wound up telling the client about it about a year later, but we didn't try to ask permission at the time. So that's another kind of little lesson I had is it's easier just to be like, oh, look at this open source project out there that I can use, even though it's like the one you just built a day ago. I've done that a couple times too. So we wound up putting a stake in the ground that said, I want to build my MVC apps in a certain way. And this certain way is to have every single view have a single view model in which the view is built around. And having all these different screens doing this, I needed to have a tool to make it easy to go ahead and build out these view models. And so that's where the AutoMapper tool really came from, is to solve this problem I knew that was coming down the pipe. Now this idea that I had of how to build MVC apps and how to do view models turned out a kind of a popular idea, at least my most popular one. Even when I go look at the traffic of our website, it's still the number 2 post all the time, that one, because I see it has incoming links from things like Stack Overflow and such. Just between 2 dumb posts, IKEA stand-up desks, and why I'm done with Scrum. So every once in a while I have a good one, but otherwise it's just, fluff pieces, those sort of BuzzFeed sort of things. So when I look at the projects that I have, there are a couple of them that do hit that third level of success of broader community support. I'm really just that first one, the AutoMapper project. But a couple of the other ones I'm still perfectly happy with. Besides Nyan Cat, obviously that's not the most exciting one. But even some of my other projects, I'm more than happy that I have 293 downloads of a project that I find a lot of use out of. And I've gotten the teams that I work to be able to use it too. So if no one else uses their project, it's really no skin off my back. I'm just happy to be able to have something that I can take from project to project to help solve a specific problem. And with something like AutoMapper, I'm able to put in production over so many projects and so much amount of time, I can start to get some really kind of cool things out of it. Things like, that's really small, but things like link projection, where it actually modifies the SQL query all the way down to the ORM provider to say, instead of me going through this intermediate layer of a domain model, I'll go ahead and modify the SQL query down at the core to make sure that I get all the data back I need and put out into the view models you want. Even a couple of my other projects, I might go years and years and years before I actually see them put into production. The first one, for example, this is one where I guess all the projects were having like a capital R at the end. I'm just not very clever when it comes to naming things, so it's just like a stupid implementation of a mediator pattern. But I saw used on many of our projects. And I got to the point where I was copying and pasting this code so much, I thought, you know what, let me just go put it out there in an open source project. At the very least, it's easier for me to pull in a NuGet package than it is for me to copy C# code around. And the second one is a similar idea that I just had this code I was copying from project to project to project. I don't do a lot of new projects. I might start like 2 or 3 new projects a year. So it's not something that I saw coming up a whole lot, but I got to the point where, again, it's just easier for me to pull in a NuGet package than it was to pull in some other assembly or something like that. But both of those saw years and years of internal use before I actually put something out as an open source project. And that means that for me, those have the greatest likelihood of continued success because I've proved them out on so many projects and so many different situations internally, so I don't have to worry about, is this going to be useful for somebody else? I don't really care. It's useful for me enough that I've seen it so many times that I'm okay with putting it out there. So that was my next lesson, was the only proof of an idea is that idea actually put into practice. Now, even though I've had a lot of success with my projects, I've also had a ton of failures. And my failures in AutoMapper, and there are a lot, looking in hindsight, there are some that I could have avoided, but some things are just part of just the growing pains of an open source project. So the first really kind of bonehead idea I had was straight up copying someone else's API. Does everyone recognize this? Structure map? Yes, structure map. So structure map has this idea that you use this static class object factory to initialize your IOC container, and inside of there you have like this little syntax to say for this thing use this other thing, and then off of that then object factory you can then get instances of that thing. So I saw that API. I thought, well, that's I'm not very good about inventing my own APIs, so I'll just go find what other people are doing and just copy it. So that's what I did. The API for AutoMapper is a pretty much straight up copy of how the API worked in structure map circa 2007. So it had a single static class where you configure through an initialize method, and then you can then go map off of that. Now at this point in time, several people I worked with said, hey, I really like your idea for this API and this project. Can you just not make everything static? And I was like, whatever. Jeremy uses statics, so I can too. What he didn't realize is that he actually hated that API and regretted it immensely and was working to try to remove all the statics out of there. And it would actually take him years and years before he was able to remove all the static pieces in there. Now, if I had just sat down, because he actually worked, at the time, he worked in the office across from me, so I literally could just knock on his door and said, hey, how do you like the API there? What would you change about it? What would you do different? I could have just taken 30 seconds to go ask him, and he would give me 2 pages of rants about how everything he did wrong in there. Now, I didn't do that, so I just did this, and I'm still living with the static as it is today. I don't really have any plans to get rid of it because that'd be just so much work to undo that it's out there, people are using it, so I'd rather not worry about it too much. But that was one big lesson I got was if I'm going to copy ideas from someone, like maybe talk to that person about how those ideas played out in real life and what they liked and didn't like about them. Because if I just had that one little conversation, he could have pointed me a different direction and said, hey, you should do this instead, or even I'm thinking of going this direction and here's why. I didn't do that, so there we are. Another issue I ran into were reluctantly added features. These are features that people told me that they needed, but I didn't really think were a good idea, but I put them in anyway. So what this one feature we had was, we were at the very beginning of using AutoMapper in the first project, and we were starting to run into the issue of we wanted to standardize how things were displayed to the end user. Now at the time, we were using something like MVC CTP5 or something, so that we didn't have there was no concepts of the templated helpers that we have today. So we had to build this ourselves. And we decided to put all the standardization of building out elements to the end user inside of a mapping tool where it really doesn't belong. So I had, this is one where I was really, really reluctant to put in there, but everybody else said, we got to do something because we're building out these screens and we really need to have something in there. So I did it. I didn't want to, but I did it anyway. And the side effect was that the tool itself, the AutoMapper tool itself, no longer was just concerned about mapping things. It then also had these other concerns involved with like displaying stuff. And so I started to get people asking for more of those features, which I didn't really want to put them in there. So as soon as I started to go outside of the core purpose of the library and pulling in other stuff, then it started to grow all these things that I really wanted to grow to. I wanted to keep my focus as tightly focused as possible to my library, and I just didn't do that. So I even got to the point where it was out there, it was in the API, but I didn't document how to use it. In fact, this is from the wiki that I said, don't use this. It was a mistake. I don't think I can undo it. But I did undo it eventually. This is the commit where I deleted all the code out, and I was so happy to do so because we weren't using it anywhere in our systems, and the system that was using it was like still .NET 3.5, so there's no way they were upgrading anyway. So I deleted it out there, and no one seemed to complain, so that was that. So that was my next lesson: is don't add features you don't want to add. It seems like a really obvious thing to like don't put things in you don't want to put in there. But sometimes when you have people that are like really enthusiastic about something extension to your project and you want to encourage them, the wrong way to encourage that is just to accept anything that anyone wants to put in there. You got to be really careful about what the focus of your library is to make sure that you can still support it going forward. Corollary to that was adding features you don't use. This is even worse than adding features that you don't want that you are using. This is one where you don't even use it altogether. So this is a feature, I don't even know exactly what the purpose of it is exactly. Someone gave me a pull request one time to say I can map from a data reader, which I guess is still a thing, into a DTO object. And they explained to me at one time how this was different than all the other 80 micro-ORMs out there. You know, how like Petapoco, Dapper, Massive. I couldn't figure out what was different with this exactly, but they seemed enthusiastic and they already wrote the code, so I was like, sure, I'll go ahead and pull it in. Until I started to get bug reports about things going wrong with it. And then I was now the one that had to fix them because the other person had gone off and done something else. They weren't a maintainer of the project. So then I had to figure out like what the hell was going on with this code. And I have no idea what this code is doing. It's doing some sort of reflection emit stuff, but I like made a personal goal in my life to not learn certain things in .NET. Reflection emit, XAML, well, any of the WX things from .NET 3.5, I just try to avoid those altogether. And so I get all these pull requests or these GitHub issues of like, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, and I'm like, it's, you know, the best I could do is say, you know, send me a pull request to fix the problem, and then of course nobody else wants to fix this code either, so who knows. So yeah, don't add first features you don't personally use. Again, a seemingly obvious one that's I don't know. Just like I don't know why it was not obvious to me at the time that I shouldn't do this, but I just wanted. I was trying to encourage someone to contribute back, and they were super excited about it. So there you go. There's something really also bad I did last year, which was I decided to unsign the AutoMapper project. That was also a very horrible idea. there were a lot of people that were complaining about strong naming and really had a lot of strong opinions about it. To say, if we could just not strong name everything, then it'd solve all these problems. So I thought, okay, well, I'll jump on board because I don't have problems either way. I don't know what problems you're having. I don't have problems either way. So I'll go ahead and remove the signing off of there, not strong name it anymore. And then I started to get issues like this one to say, hey, I upgraded and now I can't do the right binding redirects because it's no longer signed. So it thinks it's a completely different assembly and now I can't properly upgrade my projects. And I got GitHub issues, I got Stack Overflow questions, and it got to the point where I realized that I just made a mistake. I need to go back on it. So what I decided to do after that was to create a separate NuGet package for a strong name thing. That's also a really horrible idea as well, because you can't upgrade from the non-strong name to the strong name one because they have different package names. So eventually got to the point where I just put the signing back in there and unlisted this project along with the other bad ideas of projects like a Silverlight port of AutoMapper. And so this guy, I still had lots of downloads of this, over 1,700 downloads, but again, it was just a bad idea. So the next release, 3.1, put the strong naming back in, and everybody was happy again, and no one complains. Like, all the people that were complaining about strong named never put an issue in about, hey, can you remove the strong naming from AutoMapper? No one ever actually asked for that. So my mistake here was not necessarily that I removed the strong name. That was a bad idea. I also didn't tell anybody that I did that. So I just put the release out saying, oh, great, here's a new 3.0 version. And I didn't tell anyone that I removed the strong name, so people tried to upgrade, and it wouldn't upgrade. So you had a lot of people that wanted to get all the new features but couldn't because it was just too hard for them to put it in their existing projects. So that was my next lesson was, if I'm going to break stuff, well, first, don't break stuff. And if I do, I should ask or at least tell somebody that I'm breaking something. So when I wound up removing, for example, the feature on formatters, I went through several releases before I actually removed that functionality. The first thing I did was I marked all those types as obsolete, and with a obsolete message saying, this is getting removed in the next major version. And then I actually followed Simver and said, the next version that I am releasing that removes all those functionality, I'm going to tell people about it, and I'm also going to rev the major version so it's completely obvious to people that the API is breaking going forward. So I finally got to the point where things are pretty much running themselves on the project. And when this happens, when your project's on cruise control, this is when people start to ask you if your project is dead. Which is really frustrating because if you go look at my GitHub history, there's lots of commits going on lots of things, but maybe just not the project you're interested in right now. So I just have a lot of other things that I like to do. It's not like I'm not doing open source. It's just there's no project I'm working on that is in some imminent need of some new feature. And so people think that if there's not something going on with it, it means it's just not going on at all. Now, this is one of the things that if you're in open source for a while, especially in .NET, you're going to get asked this question. I don't really know about other communities as much, but it seems like something in the .NET community that you get asked if your project is dead, if it's got any sort of popularity. So that's something growing up with an older brother, I got used to people poking me all the time. So that gave me a lot of experience with patience when I get asked these sort of questions over and over and over again if my project is dead or what's going on with this or why haven't you looked at my pull request, blah, blah, blah. So I try to be as patient as possible with people using my product, and I also try to help as many as people as possible. When I'm looking at how do I actually help people with my project that need help, I try to listen at as many support channels as possible. So we have, for example, a Google group that is good for people just asking kind of random questions. That things like, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, or basically anything that Stack Overflow would reject would come into my Google group. And I still do use Stack Overflow for pretty much, that's my first level support for anything OSS, is go to the thing that gives you internet points for stuff. When I switched from using Codeplex issues to Stack Overflow for support, suddenly there were a ton more people actually answering questions about AutoMapper. People I've never met before that are just racking up those Stack Overflow points or rep score, what's it called? I don't even know. Trying to get this. In fact, my Stack Overflow score, which is still not great, I guess, that's completely built on me just answering questions around my open source project. And so anything that you have in Stack Overflow, that's interesting, you can have a tag about, and then you can subscribe to this tag. So I've actually subscribed to this tag as an RSS feed, so I get emailed whenever there's a new question about something going on in AutoMapper. Now, the other thing I do run into is that the questions usually are around people using it really incorrectly, and so I have to constantly usually I don't answer the question, I just have a ton of comments about why are you doing this? What possible thing are you running into that makes you think this was a good idea? But in a nice way. I also get questions from all over the place in things like Twitter, email, people just randomly emailing me. I don't know how they got my email, but they're emailing me. I also get questions as comments for really old blog posts. So this one was a comment on the original AutoMapper when I announced the project 6 years ago. People thought that was a good place to ask a question for support. Now, luckily, I still read all the comments, and so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and direct them to the right support channel. Say, hey, can you post this on the mailing list? And the way I try to explain to them is, other people might want to know the answer to the question, and so if it's just a comment in a blog post, no one's going to benefit from that. But if you put it somewhere where everyone's asking the questions, then everyone can benefit from it. Now, I also get other random questions on this blog post, like, I'm having a problem with my Transcend external hard disk. I don't know what to tell you. And then a question about how do I get a wave mapper on my computer. I have no idea what this has to do with me. But this person, Online Casino, really wants to know the answer, so I should probably help him out. So that was my next lesson, is I try to listen to as many channels as possible, and that's really for me to help support people that are trying to use my project. If I'm going out there and telling people you should use it, if they have a problem, I should probably try to help them out as well, even though I don't really get paid for it at all. It's just something I feel like I should do. I used to have a really hard time releasing my project as well. And this is when I started to see a lot more people in the open source community of .NET also starting to release a lot more as well. So one of the tools I use to help actually do my releases can use the GitHub issues with these fancy little tags on here. And from these tags, I run this tool called GitHub Release Notes, and this is from the In-Service Bus guys because they have a lot of releases out there. And what this will do is actually create a GitHub release for me with links to all the issues that are for that milestone. And the last thing I do before I actually push a release out is I make sure that everything that's something new in my project, that I have a link to a wiki article describing that feature. I used to not document much of anything at all, and then people would get annoyed at me, like, where's the documentation, where's documentation, where's documentation? But with GitHub issues and GitHub Wiki, it makes it really easy for other people to contribute. So I'll go and look at the wiki and see all sorts of people contributing stuff in there. And then as long as I am also setting a good example and pushing out and having features actually documented, which is like a new thing for me to document stuff, then that can, again, encourage other people to do the same as well. So that was one of my next lessons was nobody uses features you don't document. And if that sentence doesn't make sense, it's because I was like 17 beers in yesterday when I came up with this one. So there were quite a few things I saw in AutoMapper that I wish people were using. I was like, why aren't people using this? And the reason was I just didn't actually tell people about it. It was just like a completely obvious thing. Like maybe you should actually document your stuff for people to actually use it. So the last lesson I have for me working with open source is for me to feel happy about my progress and feel happy about my projects is if I can just focus on my own problems and solve what the issues I'm seeing today, then I'm happy. And if it helps anybody else, then that's really just a bonus. Otherwise, I'm happy just worrying about myself. So that's all I have. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.